Now, I'll be the first to admit, Rolex isn't my favorite brand out there, and there's only a handful of watches I would personally add to my personal collection from Rolex. Now, I wouldn't take this with a grain of salt because I do own the 114060, and I would trade that in a heartbeat. Now, personally, I think the Rolex GMT Master line is Rolex's best timepieces of all time. I have handled and reviewed most Rolex watches, and the GMT Master, specifically the Batman, is my absolute favorite. Of course, the watch isn't perfect, which we will see here today in this review. Now, I'm not going to bore you guys too much with the history of the Rolex GMT, I'm just going to kind of give you guys the gist of it. Basically, at around the 1950s, a company called Pan Am used to rely on Rolex to provide them with timepieces. Now, Rolex then came out with the 6542, which was their very first Rolex GMT Master. Now, that watch, unlike today's model, had a bakelite bezel, which was actually very flimsy, so they then changed it to an aluminum bezel. Then they came out with 4-digit Rolexes like the 1675, and then eventually came out with this model. Now, fast forward to 2013, and Rolex released this 116710, aka the Batman. People weren't crazy for this watch, and it's easy to see how. When they mixed that black ceramic bezel with some blue, it's basically a recipe for success, and in my opinion, this is the best looking GMT Master out there. Now, it's very important to note that the 116710 is actually now discontinued. However, they did come out with a new Batman that's called the 126710 that has a different caliber. The older one had the 3186, and then now the newer caliber is the 3285, which has a 70-hour power reserve. Now, another thing that's different about the newer one versus the older one is the newer one has slimmer lugs. Now, that's a positive for a lot of people. Personally, I don't mind it. However, I will say this, with the slimmer lugs, it does look a lot more aesthetically pleasing. Now, the last difference, which isn't really a big deal, but it seems to bother a lot of people, and I'm going to explain why it's not a big deal, is the newer one comes with a Jubilee bracelet and the older one comes with an Oyster bracelet. Now, technically, the first one that came out, the 6542, had an Oyster bracelet, so a lot of people saying that they went back to their roots with the Jubilee bracelet didn't really make any sense. However, you can fit either bracelet with either model, so it doesn't really matter. You just have to go purchase whichever bracelet you want. If you get the newer one, you want the Oyster, it will work either way. Now, one of my favorite things about the caliber 3186, as you can see in the footage, it has a jumping hour GMT hand. Now, I absolutely love this function. For those of you who haven't traveled before, it's actually very irritating to have to set a GMT hand. So with this jumping hour hand, as soon as you get off your flight, you just have to pull it to the first position and then have that jumping hour hand set. Then when you pull it out to the second position, you can set the watch normally. Now, I'm gonna mention a negative that I don't really find a lot because a lot of people really like the 904L steel, but after owning my Submariner, the 114060, the watch is actually very easy to scratch. Now, one difference between the 114060 and the GMT Master is you'll realize that the Oyster bracelet on the GMT Master actually has polished center links. Now, the problem with that is that it's so easy to scratch that if you guys kind of have a problem with having your watch looking new, this bracelet is very easy to scratch, so that's kind of a negative. Personally, I don't really mind it that much, but that's something you might want to note. Now, here's something that's not really a negative or a positive. Basically, the bezel feeling on this watch, it kind of has a ball bearing feeling, so it definitely bounces around rather than the Rolex Submariner, for example, that has that very nice satisfying clicky feel. However, it is very robust, there's no play, and I really like the way it actually feels, which is something that most people don't care about, but as watch enthusiasts, we tend to care about it a lot. Now, at about 40mm and 12mm thickness, you definitely feel the presence of this watch. However, it is very comfortable on the wrist. The Oyster bracelet tends to be very comfortable, even though this one doesn't have the glide lock system like the Submariner does, which I have no idea why they didn't put it in the Rolex GMT as well. Maybe they're trying to differentiate between the Submariner and the GMT. It just doesn't make that much sense to me. Now, with that thicker lugs, the watch definitely looks a little bigger on your wrist than the 40mm would suggest. It definitely looks more like a 41mm, however, it does wear very comfortably on the wrist. So between the older 116710 and the newer 126710, which one would I personally go for? Well, if you look at the pre-owned prices, you'll see that they're kind of very similar, both of them at $16,000. Personally, I wouldn't pay over retail for this one, but that's just me personally. If you were gonna purchase one, personally, I would go with the newer one. Now, the reason why I go with the newer one is it is technically better with the newer caliber 70-hour power reserve. The slimmer lugs does make it look a lot more aesthetically pleasing. And forget about that Jubilee bracelet, you can definitely install an Oyster bracelet. In fact, I would install actually the Oyster bracelet from the Submariner onto the new GMT Master. But honestly, between the two, you can't really go wrong. The older 116710 is the original icon. The beefier lugs actually looks really good. In my opinion, the slimmer lugs do look a lot better, but a lot of people like that beefier look without having the watch bigger, which is actually a big advantage to the thicker lugs. It makes the watch look a little bit bigger without it actually being bigger at 40mm. In association with ExquisiteTimepieces.com, I would like to invite you guys to check out their website. They're an authorized dealer for many brands such as Omega, Grand Seiko, Breguet, Blancpain, and many other great brands. They also have an amazing selection of pre-owned watches, so I invite you guys to check them out. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.